Alright, stern drive installation. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the bellows on. I'm going to start with the exhaust on the bottom and then the drive bellows. Get those secured, and then the water pickup hose. I'll get that put on as well. Okay, so the exhaust bellows, and this is the bellow that you can change without pulling the drive. I imagine that it's a lot harder that way. This one went on pretty easy. One thing to keep in mind is that the end of the bellows that hooks to the boat is a 1/4 inch smaller diameter than the end that hooks to the stern drive. So if you go to put this on and it slides right on, you probably got the wrong end on. What I did was I got it started in there, and then I pushed my hand in and I forced the rubber of the bellows out past the flange, and you can feel once you get it seated on there, you can run your fingers in there and you'll be able to feel that steel flange, and you won't get any more movement in towards the boat when that's compressed. Then I took the bolt or screw, try to get in there closer, and I positioned that up so that it would be easier to tighten. I also left this clamp pretty loose so it'd give me more flexibility with the bellows itself, and it went on pretty easy. So next step is put this S-hose. This is for the water intake. Goes right here. So what I've done, I've turned the steering wheel inside the boat to turn the steering helmet all the way to one side, so it gives me easier access up into here to get this hose clamped onto the pipe going through the transom to the engine. So this should be pretty quick and easy. Alright, so the S-hose is on. Pretty easy job. The only tip I'd have is put this hose clamp in a position where you can easily get a wrench on it so you can tighten it up. Next will be, I'm going to put the drive bellows on, but before I do that, I'm going to clean this shaft up. It's got some old grease on it. I'm going to clean it up, put some marine grease on that shaft, and then I'll also put that on the drive coming off the stern drive. Get plenty of grease on that. I guess this marine grease is more resistant to water than regular grease. I don't know if that's the case, but we'll go with it. But anyways, I'm going to grease that up, and then I'm going to put the drive bellows on there and go from there. So now the exhaust bellows, the water line, and the drive bellows are attached to the transom shield. The next step is to attach the stern drive. So not sure yet how I'm going to do this. If I'm going to get the drive lined up and try to get these clamps on while the drive is not connected to the transom shield and the steering helmet, or am I going to go ahead and connect the drive and then connect the bellows? I'm going to get lined up and see, which I think is easiest, and then I'll let you know. Alright, so here's where we're at. I had to back the boat up into the barn to get the transom shield up high enough to meet the stern drive. So I've done that, and I've worked the stern drive in, and everything's lining up pretty good right now. One problem I'm having is with the shift cable. It's kind of on a bind, so I don't know if, you know, I ran that cable above the water pickup hose, and that's put it in a position where you can see where it's kind of on the housing of the water intake and between the main drive housing. I think it should be off a little more to the side. It should be a little more over here. But I think, because if you can see back in there, I have it on the left side of that hose. I think it may need to come underneath it on the right side. So I'm going to pull this back out and take that hose off and try running that cable under the hose, and we'll see what we got. Okay, so I moved that cable, and I moved it under the water pickup hose, and as you can see then, it traveled all the way through the drive out here to this linkage where it's supposed to go. So it's supposed to obviously go under the hose. And I've got the drive, the shaft are together, and looking at this, I think it's going to be easier to go ahead and put these pins in and actually get the drive mounted or partially mounted to the transom shield before I try to go ahead and attach the bellows and the intake hose to the stern drive itself. So I'm going to go ahead and I cleaned that pin up good, some marine grease. I'm going to go ahead and tap that in, and the one on the other side, and at least get the drive to where I can take this crate off, and then I can manipulate it side to side. That might make it a little easier, especially for that water hose right there. That one's going to be tough. I don't think the drive bellows is going to be too bad, but the one in between is not going to be easy. The exhaust bellows is easy. You can get that from the bottom. It's that hose in the middle. That's going to be a problem. But I'll get this attached and go from there. Alright, so I have that pin in and the bolt that holds it. Little words of wisdom. You want to clean these bolts up real good and put some grease on them. But you also want to clean the pin up and put some grease on it. You want to make sure that little slot lines up as you're putting the pin in. So as you can see, that groove goes on the bottom, and you know, I took pictures of how that groove, that slot was oriented before I took this apart, and that helped. But if that's not lined up perfect, you're going to have a hard time getting this bolt in, because once you drive that pin in, it's really hard to turn. It's hard to move to get it into position. And also over here, you want to clean that hole out, those threads out real well before you get the pin in. I didn't do that on the other side, and I had to take a lot of WD-40 and a wire brush and some Q-tips and clean that up real good before I was able to get that bolt in. So I'm going to get this pin on the other side, and then hopefully I can get rid of this little cart, and I'll be able to maneuver the drive then and make it a little easier to attach those bellows. Alright, so both pins are in. The stern drive is free of its little cart, so it is in effect attached to the boat. Now I have to work on getting those bellows attached. I've been working on that one just a little bit, just to see how well it was going to go. It's not going to be easy. Unfortunately, that bellows is very rigid, and it's going to be hard to pull it up past this little lip and get that clamp tightened down. It seems to have gone on pretty well down here on the bottom. The top has me a little concerned. I need to work it on there a little better before I tighten that clamp down. But we'll see how long that takes. Alright. Well, that wasn't too bad. What I had to do, I had to take a small screwdriver, and I'd kind of get in underneath the bellows, and then I'd grab it with these needle nose, and I'd pull and work my way all the way around, and including the bottom. And on the bottom there's a lip that comes out that helps you keep it on the outside of the housing on the bottom. That's really helpful. And just keep pulling until I had the bellows in place, and then I tightened this hose clamp up on the top. The manual says to do it on the bottom. I think maybe that's so that you can get to it when the helmet's in place. If you're going to remove the stern drive, you've got to remove the helmet. So I don't know why you would do that, but at any rate, you know, it wasn't too hateful. It just took some patience. Now I'm going to try to hook up the hose for the water. It looks like it's going to be a little more difficult, but that's the next task. Alright, well, finally got that hose clamped on there, and it took quite a bit, at least twice as hard as that bellows clamp. And what I had to do, I had the exhaust bellows in place. I didn't have it clamped in, and the hose clamp kept catching on the ridges and the bellows on that, and also on the drive bellows. And it's really difficult to work on because you gotta have some tiny little hands to get back in here. See, my hand, I can't get far enough back in there to get any kind of leverage on that hose. So what I had to do, I had to take my crowbar, a little mini crowbar, and I was able to feed that back through here, get it back behind that hose, down and through there. There you can see the hose over there, and then I could pull that hose towards me and finally get it on there far enough to get the clamp on. And then once you get the hose on, you get the clamp. There you can see, kind of see, there's the clamp, the hose clamp that's holding it. If you don't have one of these knuckles, I highly suggest you go get one. It makes the job 10 times easier. And what I would do, I'd go through this hole here on the side of the transom shield, and I was able to get up in there and tighten that hose clamp up. So it took a lot of work, a lot of patience, but if you stay at it, it's not too bad. So next, I think I'm gonna go ahead and get the helmet attached, get the linkage. There's a little plate that goes back here behind the linkage, get that put back on. Now I'm gonna raise this stern drive up, and I'm not too worried about hooking the linkage up right now, and I'll probably have to adjust it anyway. So I'm not gonna worry about that right now. I just want to get this stern drive together and get it raised up. That way I can get the boat out of the barn and then work on it from there. Alright, helmet bolts are in, helmet's attached, and I got the drive raised up. I didn't raise it all the way because I have this pad to put in yet, and I didn't want to run it up and hit metal to metal. But I got it raised up high enough I can pull it out of my barn so I can get my barn doors closed. That's what I'm getting ready to do now. And then all that's left is the exhaust, bellows need attached. So I had to unattach those to get that hose attached. Now I'm looking at it, that hose looks like it might have been a lot easier to attach with the drive raised. Keep that in mind if you ever do one of these. And the shift linkage, but that should be pretty simple. Get the propeller back on, and the drive will be ready to go. Alright, so got the exhaust bellows attached, and I took that water line off and reattached it. I don't know how well you can see that, the sun's kind of glaring. It was a lot easier to get that water line on there with the stern drive raised a little bit. I was able to get my hands up under there and get a hold of that hose and wedge it on there tight. So now everything's attached there. I'm going to work on this linkage, get it put back together, and then there are two bolts that hold this linkage in place right here in a plate. And I get that put on and get the cover put on, and I'm done with the stern drive. Alright, we got the shift cable bracket in place. I'll get you a good view of that. And we hook that cable back up to the linkage on the stern drive right here on this bracket. That's pretty simple. You just twist this piece on, put that stud through the hole, put a cotter pin to it. I had left the boat in neutral when I took this apart, and this is adjustable, so if you have some trouble shifting after you get this back together, you can adjust this here to try to get it to shift a little smoother. There's a nut on the back of this to stop this piece as you're turning it on and kind of tighten it up. When I took mine off, these threads were really corroded, and by taking the nut off, you have to take the nut off to get the cable out through the stern drive, and it left a mark between, you know, corroded threads and shiny threads, so it was easy to find the right spot to put it back on there. So all that's left now is the cover and then the propeller. which I have to clean that up real good. I should have covered that with a bag or something to keep all the grime off of it from working on it, but I didn't. I'll remember that next time. Well, there we are. Stern drive installation is complete. A couple notes on the propeller if you've never taken one off. You take the bolt out of the end of the propeller here, and you stick a screwdriver in this hole, and this whole cap twists off. Now behind this cap is a tab, and when you go to take this part off, you have to take a screwdriver and bend those tabs away from these grooves. Get a close up of them. You see how they're in that groove right there. When you go to put this back on, you know, if you messed with the cap or with this plate here at all, you'll see you'll go to tighten this up and these tabs won't line up. You have to take it back off, turn the tabs a few turns, and just a little bit of trial and error. I had to take mine off 4 times before I got the tabs to line up to where I could bend them back up in there. And I assume that's to help keep this from backing itself off. Even though you tighten this bolt up, I tighten it up really tight, I would imagine there's still the tendency for this to want to work itself off. I assume that's what that gear is for. But anyways, it's back together, completed.